And breaking out of the mold that we've all been taught about how relationships should function, what's healthy, and everything like that. I mean, what you two are doing is what I would call the healthiest form of relationship, designing a relationship that works for you. No one else's rules. You're coming up with your own rules. You're reevaluating, you're checking in, and designer relationships. I think that is the way to go, and that's what makes us the happiest.
Hey guys, this is episode 3 of our 10-part series, So You Want to Be a Swinger, and we're going to talk with Dr. Shannon Chavez, who is a clinician in Beverly Hills, California, who specializes in alternative sexual lifestyles. She's going to help us work through the issues of jealousy and try to explain to us why it's not the monster you think it is. And she's going to be coming as a presenter to our event at Hedonism Resort next year in January.
Yeah, so we want you to book now. Hedo Resort. We're doing a full resort takeover January 6th through the 13th. And we've got all of these expert presenters, including Dr. Shannon Chavez, Dr. 90210, that will help you be better at being bad. So we're bringing in fitness, nutrition, hormone, sex therapists, anything that you need to make your relationship better, but also make yourself better as a human. So join us. It's selling out quick, guys. So go ahead to hedo.com, or you can book through our website, naughtygym.com. January 6th through the 13th, and we will see you there. All right.
Hey, Dr. Chavez, I am Scott. This is April. We are the creators of naughtygym.com, and we are excited to have Dr. Shannon Chavez on our show today. And you're in California, correct?
I am. I'm in what used to be sunny California, which has now been cloudy for weeks.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you do and how it, how it intersects with the sex positive and open sexual communities.
Yes, I mean, I have a sex positive practice, and it's important to have that, especially when working with sexual health concerns, which are a range of things. Some people have never even talked about these issues with anyone. So to have a safe space, a judgment-free space, a lot of the times what I'm doing is creating good information. We have a lot of questions when it comes to our sexuality. A lot of people are exploring, they're opening up, they're figuring out new ways to create passion in their relationships. And so having a safe space that's sex positive, I feel like I'm kind of a collaborative coach. I'm helping give ideas and insights, and often being the observer of what maybe you're not seeing yourself, or as a couple, what you might feel you're stuck at, and giving some really good suggestions. So I do see the practice as being, I mentioned collaborative, but also a place for people to come and figure things out, to explore, to get permission. I always say that's the first step, giving people permission to step outside of their comfort zone, or even stay in their comfort zone and know that that's okay. And that's a very normal place to be.
Yeah. Have you found just in the more recent years that's been, you're finding more people are seeking out help in how to have dialogue with their partners or exploring their own sexuality?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that's probably the biggest issue I see couples dealing with. Communication. Either they're communicating about something new in their relationship, they're trying something out and needing some tools on how do we communicate. We're getting stuck around maybe reactivity or feelings that are coming up, or we don't really know how to process. Or is there a problem to solve? I call it the solvable versus non-solvable problems. What are the things that we're just kind of talking about and processing as a couple? And then what are the things that we might actually have to figure out a solution to? And that may include things like boundaries or expectations, or setting up some rules, especially if partners are opening up or exploring outside of the relationship. We've got to talk about probably more than we're comfortable with. So it's always good to have a bit of guidance when you're doing that.
Well, we're gonna mention this probably at the end of the show too. You're coming with us to an event that we're putting on at Hedonism Resort in Jamaica in January of next year, and we're so excited to have you there. But we want to take today's episode and kind of break it into 2 parts. The first part is where we talk about this issue of jealousy that is inevitably going to pop up anytime a couple starts to explore non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, or any type of open relationship structure. But then we're also going to, on the back part of the episode, talk about a very specific issue that we have gone through recently, despite the fact that over the course, I think it's safe to say this, over the course of our 7 or so years in the lifestyle, we really haven't run into a lot of issues. Mm-hmm. But we've had one recently kind of come up. So we're going to talk about jealousy. Maybe it's counterpart compersion, mm-hmm. and then we'll move on to a specific issue to let people see you sort of counsel us yes. through the situation that we're in
action
live. Yeah, let's see how good you are. And mostly what I'm hoping to get out of that is you'll tell her how wrong she is.
I'll do my best there, Scott.
If that costs me a little extra dough, I'll know. All right, so we're going to start with the issue of jealousy, because I know from my standpoint, growing up as a male in southern United States, very conservative, Bible Belt, small town part of the country, the idea that you could let your wife have sex with another man seems so non-manly, I guess, in the culture I've grown up with. Right. It might be okay and cool if I'm go tell some friends of mine that, hey, we're having a threesome with another woman. But if another guy's involved, it becomes
a little
potentially
emasculating.
Yeah, a little emasculating. Or so that has not really been a big issue for me. But there are other things that come up whenever you start exploring relationships outside of your primary relationship that flare up that jealousy issue inside of you. And I know that you have some of those as well. So tell us, that was a long way of asking, is jealousy necessary? Is it a monster that you need to completely get rid of? Is it good some of the time, bad some of the time? Just kind of give us a big top-down picture of jealousy's role in a healthy relationship.
Yes, and I'm so glad we're talking about jealousy, because you said it's not a monster in the relationship. If anything, it's part of our human emotional spectrum. It's tend to looked at as a negative emotion. It's actually kind of comprised of a lot of different emotions. I mean, you kind of named something a moment ago, this core belief that you grew up. It's sort of embedded in you to have a certain way of thinking about relationships or manlyhood, and all of that's kind of deeply rooted within our psyche. So jealousy is not just a trigger and something makes us feel a certain way. We have to kind of look at the roots of where it comes from. And what are some of the other emotions tied to it? It could be sadness, hurt. A lot of it has to do with our past, our upbringing, the way that we were basically socialized in our environment. There's a lot of different roots to that. So I look at it as a healthy emotion, because if it comes up in a relationship, it tells us that something's important. We're valuing something. If we didn't have that feeling or value towards something happening in our relationship, we may not have the same necessary conversations about how to really design things to work for both partners. So it can actually be a point in the relationship where we start building and growing and doing a lot of the really important work. Now, jealousy can be something that gets out of hand, especially if we're not willing to look at some of those roots. And that's where I can see it being a bit more of a destructive emotion in the relationship, especially if there's resistance to talking about it, or there may be some mistruths, or I'm not feeling very open or vulnerable, wanting to share entirely why I feel this way, or making our partner feel responsible for that jealousy. But if anything, we kind of own it and know that it's an important part of working through and growing. It can actually be an incredible catalyst of growth.
So I'm trying to read between the lines here. You're saying that sometimes jealousy, when you're experiencing jealousy, is there a time that it's not just a sign that, hey, we need to have a conversation about whatever's going on that's causing the jealousy? But is there a time that jealousy is a healthy emotion that we need to have? We should have it. This is a situation where jealousy should come into play. Or is that how jealousy works?
I think that's kind of how it works. Once it comes up, kind of knowing the roots of what is actually causing it and knowing what that is, being able to be self-aware of where that jealousy comes from. For example, insecurities, that's a very common one, right? I'm comparing. There's something that is happening that's triggering maybe my feelings of insecurity or fears, or thoughts of abandonment, or I might lose something. There's always a kind of an underlying fear tied with jealousy. So that can actually be important to talk about that. Often we may be too proud to talk about some of those fears, or we get too comfortable to talk about those fears, where that level of vulnerability can actually be something that brings intimacy into the relationship. Because now we're really talking about these vulnerabilities, and we let our guard down a bit. We allow our partners to really see inside what that fear is, and we can talk about it and create solution around what we want to do with that.
Is there so when I'm feeling jealousy at something she's doing, and specifically about something within our open relationship structure, is it, well, and let's assume that she has not broken any of our pre-agreed upon rules or our boundaries that we've put in place. Is that a sign that I am thinking unclearly about this situation? Or is it a neutral issue? Because typically when I start to feel jealousy, I want to be the type of person that doesn't typically feel it, as long as I feel like what she's doing is honoring the spirit of our boundaries, and she's having a good time. I want to be able to enjoy that with her, even if I'm not participating. So is jealousy in those situations a sign that I am not processing things the way I should?
I would actually think of it as the opposite. So being able to feel your jealousy is a way to get to that place of enjoying that joy that a partner is partaking in. If we don't address our jealousy, what happens is a bigger distress occurs. I call it the feeling about the feeling. So we can get angry that we're jealous, or we can feel guilty that we're jealous. Yeah. But jealousy, as we said, it's a natural human emotion. We're going to feel it for a lot of things, even things that are really positive in our lives. So it's not necessarily something bad. But when we start to label it as bad, or we repress it, that's when other issues can come up in the relationship. So I think you actually owning the jealousy and being able to name it is a really healthy thing in your relationship, because you're able to say, all right, no agreements are broken. I'm aware of what's happening. Everything is within our communicated rules and what we've discussed, but this is natural for me to feel a certain way about it. And let me look at what that is. And my ability to share that with my loved one says a lot about our relationship, that we have that level of trust and openness, that we can work through that together. We may not have to do anything with it, but admitting that it's there often shows that, yes, we're feeling things. We're going to feel a lot of things, especially the more we explore and try new things that are different for our relationship. And that's the important part of the growth, is that we're going to feel a lot of things. Jealousy is some of it, but we want to be able to create space for all of that. Otherwise, we are going to create more distress for ourselves by pushing that away or feeling guilty about it, which doesn't serve us at all.
Right.
Well, we started this series, and again, we've said this in the other episodes, we hate the name of the series, but we felt like it was good at catching people's attention. It's called So You Want to Be a Swinger. And this is going to be part 3 of that. Because what we wanted to do was try to get people who are experts in certain areas of open relationships to answer some of the questions that we know we had when we were first starting. And jealousy is a huge one, obviously. Mm-hmm. So what is the first step I or she should take when we're starting to experience some sort of jealousy, especially if it doesn't fall outside of any boundaries we've put in place for our relationship? What is the first step for us in overcoming that?
I think first, for self, before communicating it together, is to know a little bit about what you're feeling jealous about. Is it something that happened? Is it a fantasy? Sometimes we can get into our minds and start thinking about possibilities or realities that may be triggering something within us. And that can be something that we want to look at. Is there something actually happening? Is this reality or fantasy? And what are, again, the roots of that? Is it because I'm telling myself something about the situation? Is it because I'm feeling a certain way about myself because of the situation? So if we can get to some of the roots of that, we can get a little clearer on what the jealousy really represents, and is it manageable? And by manageable, we want to look at, is it something that can be communicated? Or is this really my thing that sometimes doesn't have much to do with the relationship that we want to be aware of as well? Maybe this is a past hurt or unresolved, pieces from the past that are coming into the relationship that we want to be really aware of. So that would be the first thing. Self-examine, look at really where is this coming from? And also normalize it. I think if we don't normalize our jealousy, we tend to feel a lot of guilt, even shame, and then we start creating it into something other. And so that's really important to kind of say, yes, it's normal. If I wasn't feeling jealous, maybe that would mean I didn't really care what was going on in my relationship. So it could be, again, a healthy thing.
So the goal isn't necessarily to get rid of all jealousy. It's just to kind of process through it, communicate through it, and kind of sit with it and examine it a little bit. That's, exactly. You would say, probably a healthy way to handle jealousy. Do you think it's normal that everyone experiences jealousy? Like if somebody was in this type of situation and never experienced jealousy, would that be a red flag?
Not necessarily. I mean, you said something important. We don't necessarily get rid of emotions. We kind of move through them. So I think someone who may not be feeling or stuck in jealousy, they probably felt it and kind of moved through it. It didn't linger. Right. So it's important for us to think of that. We want to move through our emotions. When we get stuck in our emotions, it's usually because we're trying to resolve or fix something, or we're trying to minimize or take it away. But if we kind of name it, it allows us to kind of move through it and say, all right, yeah, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling my jealousy. And now I can open myself up to other emotions that I might also be feeling. Usually it may be the first one that kind of hits because it's, again, what we're valuing. It's like you said, those core beliefs about our relationship that get bubbled up, especially when we're trying new things. So I don't think that, it's not necessarily going to be there. I think that it ranges. It really depends a lot on old programming and experiences and so much that the person is going through that gives us a sense of how they're going to experience that jealousy in that relationship.
So what do you tell somebody if they come to you as a couple and they say, well, look, we've had these fantasies, we've talked about opening up our relationship, and we don't even know what that's going to look like, whether that's another person, 14 other people, or some mixture in between. But we both still feel this degree of jealousy. Like, for instance, I've had guys tell me that, I'm A-okay with a threesome with another woman. And my wife thinks that would be fun for us. But man, if you put another guy in there, I'm just going to be jealous of seeing her with another man. What do you tell somebody who's asking for guidance on how to open their relationships, but they know they're going to experience jealousy? How do they proceed from that?
Not be afraid of jealousy. I think we often, again, think of it as a negative emotion. So we're already fearing it. And that's the feeling about the feeling again, right? We're already creating distress over something that hasn't even happened. If anything, sometimes jealousy can be a very bonding thing in a relationship because it gets you to talk about and communicate and admit things that maybe you haven't in your relationship, about how important something is, or something that you may be needing that isn't happening. So it can actually be useful and something that you can utilize together as a tool. Now, I think, getting to those core beliefs is important as well, because you're going to see a lot of differences with that, especially with men and women, ownership or possessiveness, or all the programming that we've had about how to look at partnership and relationship and not wanting to share our partners, all of these different messages. So sometimes it's flushing that out of our system. Where did we hear that? I've been carrying this message around for a really long time. Is that really mine, or has that been reinforced in almost every social environment I've ever been in? Every time I've ever seen this on television or media. So we want to sometimes get to some of that programming. And we may say, I don't actually agree with that, but I've been carrying around that message for so long. Of course, it's going to trigger jealousy, but it may not be how I actually feel in my relationship with my partner.
Yeah, I think I've grown up. Well, I know when we first started talking about opening the relationship up, I knew I was going to have jealousies. I know what a lot of my insecurities are. We're going to talk about one of those very specific ones here in a little bit. But I've always viewed that sense of jealousy in myself as a negative that needs to be stamped out and crushed out. But it is interesting to hear you say, stop. I think I'm hearing you say, stop looking at jealousy as a negative that needs you to get rid of. It's just a beacon that says, hey, here's a discussion point.
Yes.
Talk about it,
Yeah.
and quit trying to make a monster out of this emotion that may just be a light trying to kind of illuminate the path.
I love that. I mean, jealousy is energy. Emotions are all energy. And, we are full of energy. We're always feeling things. So we tend to, again, let our cognition get involved with jealousy, right? It's negative, or something's wrong with me because I'm feeling this. Even animals feel jealousy. It is probably, it's just innate in us. It's part of our survival mechanism to feel a sense of competition, and it's part of who we are, and that's how we're wired. And it gets reinforced a lot throughout our lives, especially, as we said, gender differences and how we look at relationships and all of the things we're taught from the moment we come into this world. So it's very much a part of who we are. And I wouldn't look at it as a negative thing at all. I mean, I love how you described it, sort of this light that kind of gives me a sense of something that's important, or conversation points that we may want to have in our relationship. And that's where I get excited and I smile, because those are the deep, rich points where couples do the best work. So that's why I look at jealousy as that is a great pathway to get to some really important growth points in the relationship.
I love that. I think for new people coming into, or just starting to open up the relationship, or getting education about how to open the relationship up, I think hearing something like that is, I know for me, when we first started, would have been just like kick the door wide open. Like, okay, this is normal. This is okay to feel this. It's
Yes.
okay to have this discussion. This isn't bad. This isn't shameful. This isn't. So I think this is a really good conversation.
Exactly. And it helps you move through. I mean, again, I think where couples get stuck, and you may have been at this point as well, where you try to take away the jealousy. Let me minimize it. Let me make you feel less jealous. And what happens is it kind of bubbles up even more, and it doesn't allow us to kind of move through and normalize it as we need to in order to get on and move through to other emotions. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're saying, I think, that jealousy is not inherently a bad thing. I'm sure that it is a signal of some things that could be worked on in a lot of cases, but it wasn't until we got in the lifestyle that I had ever heard of what I now assume is the sort of opposite of jealousy, which is the word compersion.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about what compersion is. Is it truly the opposite of jealousy? Is it something we should be pursuing in our relationship? Just give us kind of a broad picture of the word compersion.
It's definitely on the other end of the spectrum of jealousy. I mean, compersion really is sympathetic joy, being able to have this joy and happiness for a partner partaking in their pleasures. And it takes a lot of work to get to that point. I think it requires being able to feel happy within yourself. Often, if you are dealing with your own sadness or anger or emptiness, and it's going to be difficult to have that. Compersion has a lot to do with empathy, being able to see things from someone else's perspective, being able to look at it and say, hey, this isn't about me. This is about my partner and their joy and their pleasure. And I'm able to look at that through that lens and enjoy that without it being about me. And that's why it requires that level of sort of happiness, acceptance, and peacefulness within oneself to be able to get to a place of compersion.
Yeah, one of the things that, and the reason we've been hearing that word a lot lately is because once you sort of get into this world of open relationships, you start going to meet and greets or parties or gatherings where other people, like-minded people are at, you're going to hear that word thrown around, and you're going to hear people talk about how I love to see my husband enjoying himself with another woman, or I love to see my wife enjoying herself with another man or woman, or whatever the case is. And instead of feeling jealousy, I'm feeling joy. Like, look at the smile on their face. Right. It's so fun for them. Even if they're not involved, that's a level of emotional, I kind of tend to think of it of emotional maturity, but I don't know that it's that. And that's part of the discussion we've been having lately is jealousy on one end of this spectrum compersion on the other end, and we need to always be working towards compersion in all cases, or is that not the correct way of looking at it?
I would kind of think of it more on a spectrum where they might fluctuate back and forth, right? We can actually have a balance of those two emotions. I don't think that one has to replace the other, because I think, again, they're very natural and human to feel both. Compersion is kind of how we are in relationships, even outside of sexual situations. What drives a lot of our sexual desire is seeing our partners in their best light. You know, you enjoying something that you're really good at, or being able to kind of see you from across the room doing your thing at a social event or party. And so it's kind of natural for us to be those voyeuristic, watching and looking and observing and sort of seeing our partners in that light. So that may fluctuate back and forth depending on the situation, depending on what it triggers, what's happening and what we're seeing. So I don't think that, one has to replace the other, but that we want to make space for both, because they're both really important, especially going through this process.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you would say, would you say that you need to actively work towards trying to minimize the jealousy in your relationship and maximize the compersion, or is that not the right way of looking at it?
I would say that kind of gets back to we're trying to fix an emotion. And that's not always the case with emotions. Again, if there was something solvable and fixable, then absolutely. Let's say it is something logistical or something that can be resolved or changed within those agreements. But a lot of the times it's just how we're thinking about the situation, our own internal thoughts and beliefs that many times are very faulty or very fantasy driven, something being better than it is, or the fantasy of a partner kind of enjoying something more. And then there becomes this comparison, making us feel less than. So it really challenges our self-worth. And so I wouldn't say that we want to necessarily fix or get rid of that. I think it's important to kind of know, again, where those roots are and understand them. My jealousy has meaning. It means that there's something important happening right now, and I want to understand that, rather than look at it as, or I've got to push that away and get to this place of, complete joy, because that may not be the case. That may never be the case, but I don't think you're doing anything wrong by not getting there. I think it's different situations and circumstances are going to bring up a lot of range of those different emotions, and we want to know what all of them represent and what's beneath all of them, especially if there is something that we haven't addressed. And that's usually what I'm looking the most for with jealousy, where it might be more of a solvable problem. Is there something that we're not addressing? Is there something that might be really important that we're kind of minimizing because we want to be really cool about the situation, but it could be hurting us, that we just aren't being honest with ourselves? So that's why I look at these emotions as things that can help us get to those root values and get to a place where we can actually have that dialogue and understanding. Because a lot of the times it's just validation. I want validation that I feel this way. You can't take it away. Nothing's going to make it better. But knowing that it's okay and that it's important to you to hear this is probably the most important empathy building skill a couple can have when dealing with these emotions.
Yeah, I think I've probably been looking at a lot of that stuff incorrectly. I've sort of been viewing jealousy good, or jealousy bad, compersion good. What do I have to do to move away from jealousy towards compersion? And maybe there's some element of that rings true, but I think I've been looking at those two things as the right and the wrong in and of themselves. Jealousy is the wrong thing to feel. Compersion's the right thing to feel, when they're really more just
natural and normal,
and a sign that, hey, let's have a conversation.
Yeah,
exactly. And if you think about it, our core beliefs are very black and white too, right? You kind of named one, right? That in terms of how we look at relationships or partner being with someone else. And so that's often where we can work with these emotions too, is changing those core beliefs so they're not so absolute. Sometimes this is okay. Sometimes it isn't, being able to be a bit more flexible in how we look at things, because even our emotions are black or white, right? We either feel this or we don't. We're either happy or we're sad. And so we want to kind of change that whole landscape to make it more tolerable, to be able to feel things, to be able to name it, to talk about it, to know that it's an important and normal, again, permission, normal part of the relationship to go through these things. And I think, too, there's this faulty belief that emotions are going to last forever. If we don't deal with our jealousy, it's going to linger and it's going to create problems. That's a faulty belief. No emotion lasts forever. If anything, on average, emotions have about a 20-minute cycle. If we let them just kind of do their energetic thing, it's when our mind comes in and starts questioning the whys and the hows and the whats, and that's when it kind of gets trapped in our body and it becomes physical ailments. It can become depression. So we want to be really aware that emotions are things that we have to learn what they are and how to manage them more effectively so that we can work through them, especially individually and together as a couple.
Yeah. Sometimes, well, I know for myself, my internal dialogue can make things magnified so much more than if I was just to communicate it with him. Yes. I mean, it's always, we leave the conversation like, oh, that wasn't that big of a deal. If I would have just had the conversation with you first and not with myself for 3 hours.
Exactly. I mean, think about how much energy that takes to kind of go through all of that. And then you're feeling a feeling on top of a feeling on top of a feeling. And it just completely utter chaos.
A pretty common thing for people to do. They have those internal dialogues with themselves instead of communicating with their partner first. And it does turn into a monster instead of a beautiful catalyst for communication.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we're really the only species that does that. Right. Humans, to their detriment, will think themselves out of everything and overthink. And, that's why I think, understanding emotions, as energy is so helpful, because you're able to say, all right, I feel jealousy. Where do I feel it? Maybe my chest gets a little tight. Maybe my stomach gets in knots. And what if I just kind of allow myself to feel that and know why that's coming up? Yeah. This is a new situation. Or, of course, I'm seeing my partner with someone else for the first time, and that's different. That's not something I've seen before, and it's going to be new, and new things are going to bring up a lot of new energy. So It's important to kind of allow that to happen without, again, being gridlocked and holding that in and trying to work our way through it, because we can't think ourselves out of many emotions, believe it or not. And we only do that with the ones that are more negative, because, think about when we're in joy. How often are we like, all right, I'm feeling too happy right now. Right. Let me get this under control. If anything, joy is just flowing and we just don't know it, but it's the sadness, the hurt, the disappointment, these other ones that we've in our society labeled as negative, that are trying to, like, we've got to fix it. We got to make it go away. We've got to push it away. We got to figure it out. And that's when our mind just goes rampant with trying to do all of the above.
So it brings up we want to talk about a very specific issue that we've been dealing with that we didn't know we had. 7 years of being in the lifestyle that sort of highlighted something that we had never experienced.